October 14th, 1983. Yokosuka Naval Base, Japan. 1913 hours. The air was thick, a cocktail of salty sea breeze and the greasy smoke of Japanese street food. The narrow alleys were ablaze with red and blue neon signs, buzzing under the drizzle. Walking beneath them was Mark Devereux, a young U.S. Navy sailor. He popped the collar of his jacket, shivering slightly, not from the cold, but from the electricity of it all. This was his first deployment to Japan. Everything around him felt alien, vibrant, and new. Mark didn't have much cash in his pocket. On a petty officer's salary, living large in this high-tech city wasn't an option. But he wanted to capture the moment. So he ducked into a rundown electronics shop on the corner. It was a hole-in-the-wall place, crammed with dusty shelves, old cassette players, and cheap trinkets. Mark's eyes landed on a basket near the counter, piled high with disposable plastic cameras. "How much?" Mark asked in broken Japanese. The shopkeeper, stone-faced, held up 3 fingers. 300 yen. Dirt cheap. Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed a yellow plastic camera, shoved it in his pocket, and stepped back out into the rain. He had no idea that he hadn't just bought a cheap camera for 300 yen. He had just bought the key to one of the U.S. Navy's most secure vaults. Scene: the ship's bunk, development room. Over the next 2 days, Mark snapped photos of random things. The streets of Japan, the deck of his ship, his buddies goofing off. Once the roll was done, he took it to the ship's onboard photo lab. This was long before digital. Seeing a picture meant waiting for hours in a dark room that stank of chemicals. Standing under the red safety light, Mark washed the film strip and hung it up to dry. His only worry was whether the shots came out okay. Was the focus sharp? Imagine that moment. Mark held the negatives up to the light. The first few frames were normal, smiling faces of his friends, a Japanese temple. But as he scanned toward the end of the roll, a frown creased his forehead. The last 10 frames, they weren't pictures of streets. They weren't pictures of people. They were filled with strange geometric patterns, complex diagrams, rows upon rows of numbers. Mark's first thought was that the camera was broken, maybe a double exposure. But he grabbed a magnifying loupe and leaned in close. His heart rate spiked instantly. Fear formed a hard lump in his throat. These weren't random patterns. In the black world of the negative, the white lines were crisp and deliberate. He was looking at blueprints, specifically the propulsion system schematics for a top-secret U.S. Navy Los Angeles-class nuclear submarine. Mark's hands started to shake. He hadn't taken these pictures. The camera had come in a sealed package. So where the hell did these come from? He realized then that he hadn't bought a camera off the shelf in Japan by accident. He had accidentally bought a dead drop, a camera that wasn't meant for him. It was meant for someone else. 1,000 questions swirled in Mark's mind. Was this a mistake or a trap? If he reported this to his superiors, would they believe him? Or would they think he was the spy? Because for a low-ranking sailor, possession of classified nuclear subdesigns was treason. The penalty was death or life in Leavenworth. But Mark knew he couldn't keep it. Every line on that negative was a potential death warrant for thousands of American sailors. That night, Mark Devereux didn't sleep. The camera, hidden under his bunk, felt like it was burning a hole through the mattress. He didn't know that his discovery was about to send shockwaves from Washington to Moscow. He didn't know that this cheap plastic camera was the loose thread that would unravel one of the Cold War's most cunning spies. A man who was on his ship, probably eating dinner right next to him. When Mark knocked on his commanding officer's door the next morning, he wasn't just making a report. He was opening Pandora's box, and the name that would eventually crawl out of that box was Lieutenant Commander Paul Sevin. But neither Mark nor naval intelligence knew yet that Paul Sevin wasn't working alone. To find out how deep the rot went, they were about to embark on a treacherous journey. The cat-and-mouse game had begun. October 15th, 10 a.m. Mark Devereux was no longer in his bunk. He was sitting in a small, windowless room at the NCIS field office. On the table in front of him lay the cheap plastic camera and the developed negatives. 2 agents stood in the corner, staring at Mark like he was an alien life form. "Tell us again," one of the agents said, his voice calm but hard as steel. "Exactly which shop did you buy this from?" Mark recounted the story again. His voice trembled, but he stuck to the truth. The agents knew that it was impossible for a regular sailor to forge blueprints of a submarine propulsion system this detailed. especially for a Los Angeles-class sub, the crown jewel of American underwater supremacy. The negatives were rushed to the lab. Results came back within hours. These pictures weren't taken with a disposable camera. The segments on the microfilm were shot using a high-powered macro lens, standard issue for KGB Line X agents. Someone had photographed the original blueprints, cut the film, and then hidden it inside the casing of a store-bought camera roll. The plan was a classic dead drop. The camera was supposed to change hands safely, but by a stroke of luck or misfortune, a careless shopkeeper had sold it to a random customer. Now, there was only one question: who took the pictures? The NCIS investigative team hit the ground running. Yokosuka Base was home to thousands of sailors and officers, but not everyone had clearance to access top-secret docks. Investigators narrowed the list down. They needed someone with access to logistics or the supply chain, someone who understood the technical specs of a sub. One name floated to the top of the list: Lieutenant Commander Paul Sevin. Paul Sevin, the model officer, smart, efficient, well-liked. As a logistics officer, his job was moving parts and documents between bases. His record was spotless, but when investigators dug deeper, a different picture emerged. Paul Sevin was living way beyond his means. He wore expensive Italian suits, dined at the finest restaurants, and had recently bought a sports car in cash. Living that kind of lifestyle in Japan on a Navy officer salary was mathematically impossible. But you can't arrest a senior officer on suspicion alone. They needed hard evidence. Operation Blue Lens began. 24-hour surveillance was slapped on Paul Sevin. Bugs were planted in his cabin, on his phone, even in his car. Imagine the tension in the NCIS van. They knew a traitor was walking freely right in front of them. At any moment, he could leak more intel, but they couldn't move too fast. Sevin wasn't working alone. He had a handler, a Soviet spy master. They needed to catch him too. A few days later, Sevin made a move. While sitting in a bar, he did something strange. He tucked something inside a newspaper and left it on the corner of his table before walking out. Moments later, a nondescript Japanese man walked in, picked up the paper, and left. It was a textbook dead drop. NCIS realized Sevin wasn't just selling info. He was on the KGB payroll. And the terrifying part? The sub-schematics from Mark's camera were just the tip of the iceberg. Sevin might be preparing to sell something even bigger, something that could cripple the entire Pacific Fleet. The investigators sensed the clock running out. Sevin was acting jittery. He might have sensed the net closing in. Was he planning to run or strike one last blow? Then the intercept came in. A phone call from Sevin's office to a travel agency. He was booking a ticket. Destination? Not the US destination. Vienna, Austria, the spy capital of the Cold War. Paul Sevin was running, and he wasn't leaving empty-handed. His briefcase likely held intel worth more than gold to the KGB. NCIS was out of time. They had to stop him now, before he reached the airport. But making an arrest in the middle of crowded Japanese traffic was a nightmare scenario. One wrong move and the whole operation would blow up in their faces. The highway to Tokyo, a convoy of headlights cut through the relentless rain on the crowded highway. Windshield wipers slashed back and forth, keeping time with the ticking clock. Buried in that river of steel was a black taxi. In the back seat sat Lieutenant Commander Paul Sevin. On his lap, he clutched a leather briefcase like a lifeline. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he checked the rear window for the 100th time. He felt eyes on him. Maybe it was just his nerves, paranoia kicking in. But in the spy game, paranoia is the only friend you have left. Sevin knew that if he could just board that plane to Vienna, he was free. A new name, a fresh passport, and a mountain of KGB cash were waiting for him on the other side. He didn't know that just 3 cars back, an unmarked van carrying NCIS agents and Japanese police was mirroring his every move. Through their headsets, they could hear every sound inside the taxi. They heard Sevin snap at the driver. "Faster! I'm going to miss my flight." Agent Miller, the operation lead, spoke into his mic, his voice steady. "Not yet. We don't move until he hits the airport. No cowboys, no shootouts in public." The taxi screeched to a halt at the curbside. Sevin threw cash at the driver and scrambled out, briefcase in hand. Under the bright lights of the terminal, he looked almost relieved. He tried to blend into the flow of travelers, heading straight for the check-in counters. Suddenly, Two men in suits stepped into his path. Behind them, four uniformed officers closed the perimeter. Lieutenant Commander Sevin. Agent Miller's voice was calm, almost conversational. Sevin froze. His eyes darted left, right. No exit. His grip on the briefcase handle tightened until his knuckles turned white. "We need to have a chat, sir. Please come with us." Sevin didn't fight. He knew the game was over. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Amidst thousands of travelers, without a single scream or gunshot, one of the biggest traitors in U.S. Navy history was taken down. Sevin was back in the windowless room. But this time, he wasn't an officer. He was a suspect. Across the table, agents clicked open his briefcase. Inside were stacks of crisp $100 bills. And beneath the cash, a thick manila envelope. They tore it open. It wasn't just submarine blueprints. It was worse, much worse. The envelope contained the precise locations of the U.S. Navy's Atlantic Fleet submarine tracking sensor. If this intel reached the Soviets, their subs could have parked right off the American coast, completely invisible. "Why, Paul?" an agent asked. "For the money? Or something else?" Sevin sat in silence for a moment. Then, a strange, twisted smile crept onto his face. "You think you won because you caught me?" he whispered. "I'm just a pawn. You missed the real game entirely." The interrogators leaned in. Was Sevin bluffing? Or was this the truth? Sevin continued. "The guy I was sending this to, he isn't Russian. He's one of yours, an American. He's been bleeding you dry for 10 years, right under your noses." The blood drained from the agents' faces. They thought Sevin was the mastermind, but his confession spun the investigation into a terrifying new direction. John Walker. The name meant nothing to them yet. But Sevin was pointing a finger at a spy ring that would go down in history as the most devastating intelligence breach America had ever suffered, the Walker spy ring. Sevin knew his only way out of the electric chair was to trade names, so he sang. He explained how he got roped in by John Walker's brother, how greed had turned him into a merchant of state secrets. But the puzzle wasn't finished. Sevin was in cuffs, sure. But who was the recipient of the microfilm in Mark Devereux's camera? Who was the KGB Line X agent in Japan who was still in the wind? Mark's camera roll was actually a missed connection. Sevin had dropped it, but before his handler could pick it up, the clueless shopkeeper had sold it. One tiny mistake, one cosmic coincidence, had destabilized an entire network. After Sevin's confession, the Navy realized just how naked their communications and logistics systems were. In the heat of the Cold War, when nuclear annihilation was just a button press away, this intel was a ticking time bomb. Paul Sevin went to trial, but based on his intel, the FBI and naval intelligence launched a massive manhunt. Their target, John Walker and his family, a clan of traitors eating America from the inside out. Mark Devereux, the young sailor, still didn't grasp the magnitude of what he had done. He didn't know that his 300 yen plastic camera had pivoted the course of history. He just knew he did the right thing. But the story doesn't end here. After Sevin fell, the Soviet Union didn't just sit back. With their source burned, they were preparing a countermove. And that move would be even deadlier. Winter, 1984. Snow dusted the courthouse steps, but inside the courtroom, the silence was absolute. Paul Sevin stood in the dock. Gone were the dress whites of a proud naval officer. In their place hung the drab gray of a federal prisoner. His eyes were cast down. The gavel came down. Guilty. Espionage and treason. Paul Sevin was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. In the blink of an eye, his career, his honor, and his future were incinerated. As he was escorted out by marshals, he didn't look back once. He knew he was walking out of that room and into the history books as a villain. But Sevin's fall wasn't in vain. His confession gave the FBI the scent they needed to tighten the noose around the John Walker spy ring. It took time to reel Walker in, but Sevin was the first domino in the chain reaction. His betrayal proved a hard truth. National security isn't just threatened by enemies across the ocean, but by the greed sitting at the desk right next to you. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in the Pacific, Mark Devereux stood on the deck of the USS Los Angeles. The salt spray matted his hair. He wasn't that scared kid in Yokosuka anymore. On his uniform, a new ribbon caught the sunlight, the Navy Commendation Medal. There was no ticker tape parade for Mark, Shadow wars and intelligence victories don't get headlines, but his commanding officer had pulled him aside quietly. "You might never be famous for this, Mark," he'd said, "but you saved thousands of lives. That 300 yen camera of yours? It was worth more than this entire fleet." Mark stared out at the horizon and smiled. He thought about the sheer randomness of it all. The butterfly effect. What if it hadn't rained that night? What if he hadn't ducked into that specific shop? What if he'd bought a different camera? History would have been written in a different, darker ink. Sevin might have leaked intel for years. American subs might have gone silent in the deep, destroyed by an enemy who knew their every move. Call it fate, call it destiny. The course of the Cold War had pivoted on a rainy night in a dusty Japanese electronics shop. Today, the Cold War is just a chapter in history textbooks. The tech has changed. Microfilm and disposable cameras are artifacts now. Today, treason travels through fiber optics and encrypted files. But the story remains the same. The technology evolves, but human greed and human betrayal is timeless. Mark Devereux's story serves as a reminder. The ultimate failsafe isn't a firewall or a steel vault. The ultimate security is integrity. It's proof that an ordinary person, with the courage to do the right thing, can outmaneuver the most powerful intelligence agencies on Earth. That plastic camera is long gone. The negatives are gathering dust in a classified archive somewhere. But the lesson stands tall. The truth cannot be buried. Whether it's hidden in a roll of film or in the conscience of a man, the truth always finds its way to the light.